Hi everyone, wonderful to see you here today. Thank you for joining me. I'm very excited to be sharing the Rebus Ink project with you today. Now, if you're familiar with the Rebus Foundation, we do a lot of work in open education with the Rebus Community Project. Rebus Ink has a bit of a different scope and has had a bit of a different trajectory, and we're now really excited to be at the point of being able to share it publicly and start inviting some beta testers, so stay tuned for that. Okay, now I'm going to throw up my slides here. There we go. I'm going to assume everything's operating unless someone tells me otherwise. Right, so Rebus Ink. What we're going to talk through today is a little bit of the project background. We're going to explore what Rebus Ink actually is, the application, and give a demo, which is going to cover part of the platform that we have actually built, and then some design work that's been ongoing on the next couple of phases that we're working on. We'll then chat about the future plans, what else is going to be added over the coming months and years. We've also been, we've just recently undertaken an extensive UX research process, so I'd like to share some of the findings and guiding principles that have come out of that. And then we'll talk about how to get involved and how you can start playing around this thing, and I will answer any and all questions that you have. But starting off with the project background, we're very lucky to have Boris Anthony, who is the Rebus co-founder referenced here, who started with a problem about managing his own reading and came up with a frankly pretty awesome solution to it that was hacked together from a few different pieces, and that really was the beginning inspiration for the Rebus Ink project. With that prototype, or with the idea, we were awarded an initial grant from the Mellon Foundation to conduct R&D. So with that, we developed the prototype a little further, and we also conducted some research speaking to researchers, librarians, aggregators, and a few other folks in the ecosystem of scholarly publishing and scholarly reading, particularly around monographs. And from that, we published a white paper, An Open Approach to Scholarly Reading and Knowledge Management. I'll share a link to that later if you're interested. And that set us up with a really strong foundation to move into a second grant phase, which is what we're in right now, continuing with our funding from the Mellon Foundation. And this here is a look at the original version of the prototype that Boris worked on. So through the research that we did and the thinking that's been done around reading in digital formats, reading in a web environment, the problem we've really set out to solve is for researchers, and we're mostly talking about academic researchers working in arts, humanities, and social sciences, although there are applications beyond that. Those folks that we've spoken to, they tend to be reading and managing an extensive set of texts. So whether it's for an individual project or just the stuff that accumulates over a career of research, there can be an enormous volume of texts that they are working with, returning to, introducing into new projects, holding up against each other. There's a lot of work that's done. And in that, they are currently underserved by the tools that exist around organizing, note-taking, and sense-making. There are lots of tools available. Some of them do one piece of the puzzle very well, but what we've found through speaking with researchers is that it's a bit of a puzzle where they have to put a bunch of things together that don't necessarily fit, that don't necessarily talk to each other very well, so it becomes very siloed in terms of the work that they're doing. And that we have found, countless different ways that people are stringing these tools together, using things like Word documents and spreadsheets to supplement them when they need to. And the workflows tend to end up being not exactly smooth. They really vary in how well people have been able to adapt and work with them, but of everybody who we've spoken to, there hasn't been a single person who has said, yes, absolutely, this workflow is excellent, it works for me, it does everything I need it to. There are always things that can be done better. And one of the real key problems is that when a tool is focused on one individual task, it doesn't take into account the whole workflow of thinking about what you're doing when working with these texts. And in particular, we come to we come to solving this problem with a real belief in the power of openness, open principles, open source software, working with APIs, and being part of an ecosystem rather than trying to replicate and compete with existing solutions. So we'll talk a little more about that later. So Rebus Ink is our proposed solution to this problem. It is a web-based research workflow application helping researchers to read, ideate, and write more efficiently, effectively, and systematically. We might workshop this a little bit on the words, but it's what we've got right now. So the idea is that it connects each of the phases of this workflow, and in doing so, helps researchers spend a little less time rifling through, a troublesome workflow or work that they haven't been able to organize or connect in the ways that they want to, and spend the time instead thinking about what those texts mean together and creating and producing more scholarly thought and work as they should be focused on. So it's about connecting reading with note-taking and sense-making, and applying organizational structures across each of those phases so that they're connected all the way through. And finally, as I said, we really believe that this needs to be built open first. So it has an open API. We're working on articulating multiple import and export points so that data can come and go. And we really want to connect pieces of the ecosystem that are already doing their job very well and allow users to then have a more streamlined workflow where they don't run up against the seams as hard as they do at the moment. So going into the actual application and how we're approaching it, Rebus Ink essentially has three core components. You have the sources, which can obviously include, your standard academic texts like journals and books. Also, we really think that we can take a wide view of what counts as a source. We know that people are working with materials that go far beyond written text for a start. Certainly there's a lot of web content involved, but people are also working with video, audio, Twitter threads can be a fantastic source of information that you might want to drop into a collection and keep with other related topics so that you can use it as part of your thinking as you're working. So we have a broad kind of idea of what a source can be. You then have notes, and these are essentially the atomic unit of Rebus Ink. So everything kind of revolves around them in a way. So once you have a source, you create notes attached to it. That's not the only way to create notes, but that tends to be the major relationship. And then we have notebooks, which are the space where you start to engage with the notes, work with them, build connections between them, and start moving from the idea generation of the notes into something resembling an output, if that's what's appropriate for the project that you're working on. It can also just be a thinking tool, but often leads towards a publication of some sort. So the core flow that you go through is creating a source, annotating it, organizing the notes that you've created, and then manipulating the notes, creating those relationships and laying them out in different ways to help you make sense of them. And so now let's look at the platform as it is today. So got a strange message from Zoom, but I'm gonna just carry on. So what we're going to look at first is the application as it's built today. Now this is in a fairly basic form, but it's the accumulation of a lot of work over the past several months and years before that, to build a really solid foundation where we can start then iterating and adding more features that fit within the basic framework. So here we have the sources library. Now this is one that I've pre-populated with some real, some creatively made up content, and I'll walk you through it bit by bit, and then we'll go through creating a new source together. So to start with, I do have to ask that you ignore this little workspaces panel up here. That was an early iteration of notebooks that we're kind of moving to handling in a different way. But what we have is a collection of sources. Now these here, you can see we have books and articles. We have a source that doesn't have a match. That might be something we haven't anticipated. We have a podcast here that's filed as a conversation, a couple of others there as well. So there's a real range of sources. And how they've then been organized is into these stacks. So you see them along the side here, and then also in this column down the middle. And these stacks are a way of just stacking up a bunch of sources that are related. Any one source can exist in as many stacks as you want. That's a really critical idea for us, because what we've found through speaking with researchers is often when they're working with something like Dropbox or the file folders on their computers, they tend to run into the limitation of not being able to have one source exist in many places, or at least it's not easy to achieve that. So we've taken a very non-hierarchical organizational approach here. And so, for example, we can jump in and say, okay, I'm writing a blog post. I have these texts that I'm using to inform that. And then you see that a lot of them, they all have in common labor and precarity. So this is maybe a place where I'm doing some thinking and exploring of a topic, but I don't have a specific output in mind yet, like a blog post. It can, you know, move between those two, but you don't have to start from the point of already knowing what it is that you're going to write or create or produce. So we have a slightly expanded thing here. We also have, you know, I've chosen to identify where these things have come from. It's just the same mechanism here. They do display as tags here, and right now they're fairly simple. What we expect is that stacks will evolve into having a few more attributes, so you can do a bit more with them than just tag materials. So it is about being able to use it as an organizing mechanism. Then if we come back to the main page here, I can show you one of our existing texts. So here, the science of managing our digital stuff. This gives you a preview of the reading interface, which we'll look at further. But I'll open up here, and here we have a user-generated description for the text and some metadata as well, which again, I'll look at in more detail once we're creating a source ourselves. So let's do that now. So I have forgotten the name of the title of the book that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to call it I don't know what's happening in my brain there. Great Book 1. And then here we can immediately add a little bit of information without having to go right through the full set of metadata. So I'm going to upload a file for this one. So here we have, right now, you can upload EPUB files. That's going to expand. I'll talk about that in a moment. And let's call this, let's say that this was a recommendation from Boulder. Why not? And then I'm going to choose here that it's a book. But again, you can see here there are a lot of different source types. And what we're working towards is that each of these has a slightly different set of metadata as well. It's mapped onto a common standard, but so that what makes sense for, you know, a video doesn't necessarily make sense for a book, but you can keep track of those things. So we'll go with book for now. And I can create my new source. And then right away we can come in here and we have the text itself. And we can navigate through with the table of contents, pick which section we want to be reading, and interact with it here, and then go back up through the rest of the chapter as well. So to go back into the metadata section, that is what I just clicked. What's happening here? No, it's having a little bit of a moment. Live demos, it's always the way. There we go. Okay, so we can come in and I can add my description about the text. So here, right now, there's just one field for this. You could copy it from the source itself, whether it's an abstract or whatever else is available to you, or you can create your own description where you talk about it in your own words, and that these descriptions are searchable. So that means that if you have your own common language, we have, you know, proper tagging systems available and things like that. But you can also just freeform it, and then that will be discoverable for you later. So there is our description, and then we can edit the metadata here as well. Now this right now is just a laundry list. We're, as I said, putting a bit more thought into what makes sense where, but for now, let's throw in an author name, an editor name. Let's say that this is in French. Okay, I'm not sure why it's doing that. Let's not worry about the language for now then. Please let me save, even with that going on. there we go. So we at least have the author and the editor here, and there's a lot more that'll fill out this panel. You can too, obviously there is a cover placeholder here. Will be able to upload a cover yourself. Hopefully we'll be able to extract one from an EPUB if it's there already. And then otherwise we'll probably replace this with something like an icon associated with the source type or something like that. Okay, so we'll come back into the reading interface here, and let's say I'm looking at the introduction. Now, the next piece that we're building that is not quite there is hinted at by these tools here. I'll show you in a lot more detail what this looks like, but essentially we're going to build in annotating tools here where you can highlight and work with the text. So I'll show you that in a moment. Awaiting that, however, I will take you over to the notes library. Now this, again, this is a bit of a testing data, so these aren't very, very useful notes, but they are notes nonetheless. So the other way that you can create notes in addition to annotating on the text itself is just through this interface here. And so I can say, I've had an idea to do XYZ, and you will be able to attach that to a source if you want to, or to a notebook. There'll be ways to organize it. Right now, it's just kind of an idea capture. But here we have my new note down here. And same thing, we're building out these filters. So you can, just when you're working from here, search through and, okay, we have one that's about the Mellon report. I think we have one that was a recommendation from Boulder. And then you can also use the same organizing system of stacks to find notes that are created on sources within a particular stack. So here again, because it's the one, oh, it's not autofilling, that's right. And then same with source. And then the next phase of this as well is to add more attributes to a note. So things like color coding, flagging it with a preset set of flags that I'll show you in a moment. Tagging it as well, that's a bit more freeform and available for people to use in the ways that they want. So this is kind of your massive notes with a few ways to navigate through them, but it's certainly not necessarily the best way to interact with notes and start building connections between them. So these here are pointing towards a new set of features, which I'm going to show you the designs for. So this is what we have in terms of the interface itself so far. So the library, the reading interface, and the notes library. Discovery is a bit of a placeholder. We think that there's a lot of potential there. Haven't given it too much thought beyond that right now, but it's there to kind of indicate where we're headed. And so now I'm going to switch over into our Figma, which has all of our design work. And so we're kind of, this is the bit where the back end and the design and the front end are all kind of working at the paces at slightly different phases of it. So they're not quite connected up yet for us to be able to show in the way that I have here, but you'll see where we're headed. So to start, what I didn't show you is that right now when you log in, go to the index page, hey, it's blank. But we're going to replace that with a very lovely index page, which I have taken to calling the desk. So we have a concept that everything that we do here can be thought of in relation to and in relationship with the physical space. So having an index page that we think about as a desk means it's going to have everything that you last touched so that you can pick up where you were. So here we have the most recent notes that you've created, the most recent sources that you've interacted with, the most recent notebooks, and the most recent canvases, which I'll explain shortly. So the idea is you can just pick up where you were. And that means that whether you are moving between a home office and campus or picking it up on your phone to check something very quickly, you have a shorthand to be able to dive back in right to where you were and have that context here waiting for you. Next, I'm going to show you the next couple of phases of the reading interface. So this here is a more fleshed out metadata section. So you see a lot of the same information, but arranged a little differently. And then we'll work towards having related items connected here. So you can see all the relationships between the materials you're working with from here. Citation obviously is very important, and then here we have the related notebooks and sources. From here, we'll then look at the reading interface and the process of creating a note. So we have, as you saw before, the table of contents, we have the text itself in the middle, and this is showing what it will look like when you highlight text and want to create a new annotation or note. We have a few options here. You can just use color. We found in the research, some people really like color, some people are really deliberate about not using it, and obviously from an accessibility perspective, color isn't going to be useful to everybody. We envision that in future iterations, the user will be able to customize what they want to appear here. So if they know they just don't use color, we don't need to have it show up here. That's obviously a little more advanced, but it's where we're headed. We then have the flags, which I mentioned earlier. And so this right now is a preset of terms that we've come up with. So flagging something as an idea, flagging something as a question that you have, something you need to come back to, a to-do maybe. All of these kinds of things have come again from conversations with researchers, and we'll work on this list. Something too I would really like to see be customizable in future. You can then immediately add your note to a notebook, which is the place where you then interact with your notes and connect them to others. So you can do that directly here if you already know. We also will allow you to set a default notebook. So if you know that you're reading for a particular project, then you can say up front, every note I create in this reading session essentially will go into a particular notebook. And then this shows a little bit of what it looks like once you have your notes generated. This first one here is the first one that we'll implement that's very close to being done, where you have highlighted text, you have your user-generated content here, so whatever you've typed in, you've put a flag on it that it's important, and you have the notebooks here if you want to see that as well. We're also really keen to look at other ways to interact with texts, how that differs depending on the format of the text itself. So here's something where you've just selected a section and created a note where perhaps you can't highlight the text itself. And blue skies, when we get there, that'll be really great. Also being able to just freeform write on a text. There's, you know, the technical complexity of these things, there are a million things to consider, but here is captured some of the ideas of how it works. The other thing I'll highlight here is an idea where you can flag either a page or a section, which kind of not depends what your format is to what you tie it to, that you can return to. If you flag a bunch of things that need validation, then it's possible for us to then just display those sections so you can come back to them. That again will kind of predict what we think or work with users to have a few different ways of tagging things as they see fit. And here again, you see just a few more notes on the page and what that can look like. Moving on to the next one, we do also have a notes filter in here that allows you to just show some of your notes, particularly, you know, if you're just working within one notebook. We know from speaking with people that it is very, very common to have one text, one source used in multiple projects, and then even the kind of reading that you are doing to that source can differ. So you may take a first pass and tag all of your notes with a specific thing to indicate that was your first read. We may even create a system for that if we see that there's need for it. And so it kind of allows you then to not just have everything dumped in this, this panel on the side, but actually show what it is that you want to see at any given time as well. And then the last piece of the reading interface that I want to show is video annotating. So this is a first cut of a feature that we do not know when we are going to build, but we know that sources are far more than just text, and so the same principle could apply to audio files. The other thing that we see as well is a version of this interface where you can create your new notes without having any text at all, regardless of whether it's written or video or other multimedia, that you could be reading a physical book, for example, and also have this note interface up, so you can create your notes within an environment that has the context of your stacks, your notebooks, all of the work that you've put into creating an organizing system. You can interact with that in lots of different ways. It could be that you're listening to a conference talk and you open up this, you create a source that is that conference talk and take your notes as you're listening. So this is a fun, slightly thought experimenty version of a reading interface, but we think there's real value in it. Okay, and moving on, I will finally give you a look at the notebooks. So a notebook in some ways could be thought of as almost a small desk. It also is made up of different sources, notes, and these canvases, which I'll explain. So you have a way to group things together. We didn't want to make this project-based because it isn't necessarily, that isn't necessarily what people are trying to achieve. It's not necessary that you start with the idea of what your output will be, and so you can define it around that. Notebooks can also just be a place to think. And so we wanted to make sure that we supported that. So here we have the notes that are in this notebook. We have a few of the sources as well, and then the canvases. Oh, and I have a cat who's going to join me and going to go right back down on the floor. Sorry, buddy. So canvases, that's not what we're going to call them in the final version. We kind of know that already, and I had hoped that we'd have the language better before today, but it'll come. Those are a way to interact with notes. We have three kind of defined that we've seen as being useful for folks. One is to be able to create an outline. So creating a fairly linear list of all of the notes that you've taken, creating new notes as well. So you can start just sketching out the framework of a piece of writing that you are going to put into place. And that could be a script or anything as well. It certainly doesn't have to just go into a traditional format at the other end. The next one is a mind map. So thinking about drawing connections between notes that you have in a non-linear way. So thinking about and attaching new notes that create different themes or the nature of the relationship between the notes. And then the third that we have in mind is a kind of grouping mechanism or theme development where you can categorize your notes just within a context. So you don't need the same language when that note is used in a different notebook, for example, but just as you're thinking through this particular project, you want to say, okay, these are all related to theme A, these are all related to theme B, and then you can kind of move them around and interact with them in that way. So those are works in progress, and they will live within these notebooks so that you kind of have this place to play around. And the kind of very clear next step from that is being able to export those. We need to spend some time thinking about how best to do that, what's most useful, but there is kind of an exit sign very much so on this work where we know that that's the next phase in the process as people move into something like a word processor to start working on developing out what it is that they've started in this context. So the last thing I'll show just while I've got my screen up here is I have thrown to, I'm the only person in this right now, but we'll put together a support forum, essentially. We're really keen to make sure we develop this in conversation with researchers, so we understand what it is that they're doing. That's also why we're introducing this beta when clearly, you know, we're not all the way there in terms of the features we want to release, and an actual official launch is still several months away. But we want to make sure that we're working really closely with people and understanding that what their priorities are and helping that make our decisions. So if you're interested in the beta, I'll talk about that more in a moment, but the information is here. And this is also a place where over time, we'll use this as our communications kind of channel for things related to features and release notes, bug reporting and things like that. For now, we'll see what it evolves into. What will be great is if this gets totally overwhelmed and we have to rethink everything, but for now, this is our place to kind of talk about the platform itself. And we also have an idea. We would like also to be able to support people to exchange ideas about how to do this work, because what we've found is that it's often something that isn't formally taught. People put together their own process over time, stringing together what they can. They'll maybe learn from a mentor, but it isn't a very smooth process for a lot of people. So our hope is to be able to be a part of that. Okay, so I think that's it for the demo, with an eye on time because I definitely want to leave time for questions. I'll head back here and talk a little bit about what's next in terms of the software. So a clear need is to increase the number of formats supported by the reading interface. Right now, we can work with EPUBs. That's our, that was our starting point, and we know we're going to grow from there. We also know PDFs are a non-negotiable. There's a lot of range within what a PDF can mean, so we're going to kind of work through that and prioritize, but we know that it's really important. And then, as I said, we're super keen to get into things that aren't traditionally thought of by, when people think about what a source is. And this again is, we've had countless people say, oh, I will name check, and I don't say this to cite it in a limitation, but people have said, oh, I use Zotero for a lot of my work, and I have it as my citation manager, but it doesn't really handle my images well. And so I have a separate spreadsheet where I have to look after all my images and track them there. There's all sorts of things like that. The next one here, import-export options are really important. This goes for almost everything. Being able to bring content and metadata in is important. Being able to import notes from when you are reading in another place. We know not everybody is going to read all of their sources within our interface. That's the reality of how people have access to the content that they work with. So we're thinking about how we can support that by at least allowing them to import notes that they take, whether they've done that just freeform in a Word doc or a Google Doc or something like that, whether they've used another tool. That's a place to investigate. Pages is actually, oh, I forgot to change this. This is what I'm trialing out for canvases. If anybody has thoughts on that, I'm interested. I'm just like really trying to get the naming right on that one. And user data. It's really important to us that people understand that they aren't beholden to us. We don't want to own their data. It belongs to them. It's generated by them. So we want to have really clear avenues for people to have clarity on what it is in terms of user data that we do store, and have a clear avenue to remove themselves from our environment if they choose to. As I mentioned earlier, enabling custom taxonomies and other user options is really important. We know people like to create their own ways of doing it. We want to start with really sensible defaults so that people can come to it without a pre-existing system and work through, figure out what works and not. More of these tools to build connections between notes. Building connections between sources is something we'll probably play with eventually too. And then we're really interested in how we can integrate with content aggregators, with other publishing platforms and discovery tools, things like that. That's again all blue sky, sorry. We've got a lot that we can do there. And yeah, so my roadmap is 20 years long. I think we could get all this done in 5, all going well. We'll kind of see how we go along the way. Okay, so again, as I said, I'm aware of time. I'm going to run through this a little more quickly than I might have, but I wanted to give you a bit of insight into the UX research that I've been referring to along the way. We worked with a couple of experts on this. We brought them in for a 12-week process. It has been so valuable. It has crystallized a lot of thinking. It's brought a whole lot of new ideas and potential in, and it's just has been a fabulous process. And we have a full user research report that we're going to release openly very shortly. That's in progress right now. So user profiles is one thing that came out of this. So they interviewed 18 researchers with a range of experience and found that they kind of fall along not quite a binary, but this sort of spectrum with very heavy towards each end. On one end being process-oriented researchers, so these folks tend to have developed these systems and workflows, and they aren't necessarily happy with them, and there's a real openness to making them better, and that's kind of a constant process that they find themselves in. And then there are what we're calling output-oriented researchers who aren't necessarily thinking about their own process in the same way that the process-oriented researchers do. They're more focused on the output and will kind of do whatever it takes to get there. They tend to be very dependent on their memory and the kind of the mental systems that they've developed. And so we're keeping these two user profiles in mind as we develop things, because we really think we can be useful to both. And I think if we excluded either, we would, that makes no sense, because in addition to these being an overall tendency for someone, there is also we've had really good input that sometimes one person can be both of these, and it depends on the project that they're working on or the context that they're in at that moment. Like, this isn't just a one or the other. Some people do both. And then the third column here, which was a profile identified, which is newbies, people who are new to this work, who haven't had the time to develop their practices. And as I mentioned, are not generally supported to develop these systems with kind of input. A mentor may do so. They may come across tools through something like their library, but we found a lot of people who kind of were just walking through the fog a little bit and figuring themselves out. And so we see a place where we can support those people specifically to work out which of these kinds of researchers they might be, and then help them develop those competencies further to again allow them excuse me, to stay focused on their work, which is where it should be, excuse me, a lot of talking. Okay, and then the other thing to come out of this UX process is some design principles that I'll skip through a little quickly. Starting with connection. Everything that we do is about connecting thoughts, it's about connecting notes, it's connecting writing to thinking, reading to thinking, reading to writing, all of these things. It's a real kind of sort of networked approach to thinking about the work that people are doing, rather than having one area kind of isolated from the others. Context is really important too, and this is something in what you've seen that we already know there are a couple of places to improve on. So users really indicated that they need to know where they are, and that's again part of building the way that we have that they can have the context of where they are in their thinking, where they are in their broader work. Portability, as I said, lock-in of data is a real concern. Maybe not for everybody, but for so many people that, and people who we value, and it's our value too. We really believe strongly in this. So that's a principle of design that we take in, making sure that, that we respond really directly to those concerns that users have. Inclusion. This has always been part of the Rebus way. This goes through, designing our software with accessibility in mind, and Boulder, frankly, has been a really fantastic asset in that, and puts a lot of time into ensuring that we're meeting best practices and staying up to date. It goes further than that as well. We certainly don't want to build this as a tool that's only available to a very small part of the research community. We have a lot of ideas in mind of how to ensure that, how to make sure our user base is really representative, and particularly that we're thinking about new researchers coming in and making sure that this isn't yet another barrier that they face when trying to learn and access the research community and become a really, a really valuable member of it. Openness, this one is maybe obvious, but we do name it very specifically, and this is openness in our software and also openness in what we do. So that's the thinking behind the forum that we've got. We're going to be sharing everything as we go. That's part of this presentation too, and sharing this UX research. That'll be coming out later. What we do well, what doesn't work, all of that you're going to hear from us. We're wide open on this, and really want to make sure that we're transparent about how we're approaching solving a problem that people kind of see and recognize, and get them on board with how we're solving it as well. And coexistence, this is a really significant one as well. Nobody operates in a vacuum. Our users don't, we don't, the application doesn't. We are connected, and we are reliant and we are, you know, continuously bouncing off other people. There are a lot of ways in which we think about this: technical integrations, partnerships and relationships with other folks in the ecosystem. And then there's this one here, which I really kind of just wanted to flag is I think it's really significant that we don't think about the digital and physical spaces as being separate. This is a digital tool, but it will be used by people sitting at desks. It will be used by people who have bookshelves. It'll be used by people who are moving between different spaces. They might be in an archive or a library that they only have limited access to one, you know, for a week kind of thing. There's a lot about the physical space that we have in our thinking and really kind of want to make sure that we address really explicitly. We're not trying to say that, oh, we're going to make a tool so good that nobody will ever read in paper again, because that is not a thing that's possible. So we want to work with that in the way that we work with all of the other kind of factors that influence what we do and how our users are working. Okay, with the last couple of minutes, and then I'll leave 15 for questions. Do you want to play with this? Obviously, it's early. We're kind of opening this up early in the process, but we think that's the only way to kind of know if we're on the right track. So if you are interested in being a beta tester, we do ask that you recognize that this is a work in progress. Things won't work right. New things will show up all the time, and some things may disappear, including maybe your data. We kind of just need to leave that possibility open so we can make the best choices around the database if there are still changes to make. That's why it's really critical that if you are involved in the beta, that you're also on that forum, just so you can be notified of things as they're changing. So that's the next point here, that you agree to be notified, and that we ask that you offer some feedback. You know, this will look different for different people, but certainly we want to be engaging with you and speaking through things. And two, just to be able to keep the context, because as I say, if you came to this without, you know, having heard about where we are in the process and why we're approaching it this way, you know, I wouldn't want you to look at it and be like, oh, well, you know, if that's a silly tool, why would anyone do that, and then just kind of drop out. So we want to keep that conversation going. The link is here. I'll also drop that in the chat once I stop sharing my screen. Right now, we're not putting limits on numbers, but we do need to gauge that in terms of the response that we get to this call for beta testers. We have a very small team. There are 4 of us on the product team. And so that's me, a designer, and 2 developers. We need to be aware of how we can manage that. So that's just a purely practical kind of thing there. Okay, okay, question time. I'll leave this up for half a second for if you want to grab our Twitter details there, but I'll stop sharing shortly. And if anybody has questions, I would ask that you drop them in the chat and I'll read them out, or you're welcome to unmute and speak. And again, I'll drop the link to the beta information and these contact details in the chat shortly as well. Okay, let's see if there's anything. Allegra, yes, yes, we'll definitely share these slides. I'm not sure how what the option is to do that through the OPF archive, but certainly on the Rebus Ink Twitter account, we will do so, so you have access to these. Okay, I'll just keep looking back through the chat, but anybody's welcome to chime in if they like.
I'll ask a live question. Thank you so much. I'm Jonathan Greenberg. I'm from New York University Libraries. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this product, and I really hope that the principles that you have set out to set out in designing this really are that they kind of promulgate through the scholarly communications infrastructure, because I think that many more products and databases need to take this kind of thing into consideration. So I'm really happy that you're doing it. I have a lot of questions, but I'm just going to ask 2 quick ones. One of them is, at least in the early stages, is this meant to work with or replace existing reference management software like Zotero? And I'll ask the other one, and then you can answer them together. And the other one is just, And it goes along with using these types of things in many different locations and contexts. Is this mobile, is it being designed to work on mobile devices from the start? Will there be a mobile app? Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Yes, absolutely. I'll start with that one. Definitely. We know that people interact with these things on more than just a computer. We think tablets are really important as well as mobile. What we are kind of taking as our approach on that is we don't think that it needs to have absolutely all of the functionality right across every device. If you know what I mean there, we're going to kind of be considered in what we choose to prioritize for each of the different kind of devices that you might access this via. And so we have, you know, I showed the design work that we've got for desktop certainly, but we have mobile designs in progress as well. As I say, tablet is significant. We know particularly for reading and annotating, it's a popular option. So we kind of, given resources, can't blanket say, yes, it's going to be exactly the same and just as powerful across the three. We're trying to take a thoughtful approach there. And that's another thing where if what we find is an overwhelming, you know, need from users that we do actually need full functionality on mobile, then we put energy into it. We're kind of trying to make sure that we get the foundations and the principles right. And then to your question about Zotero, it's working with, what that looks like is a little bit of a fuzzy, we have some ideas. To me, I think this in combination with Zotero is really, really powerful. And it also just, you know, from a purely practical perspective, we don't want to have to rebuild everything that they do so well. So what's great is that they're also non-profit. They also have quite a, you know, an open ethos. And so we want to kind of work with that and work with the options. They already have a lot of kind of ways to interact with them. And so what I would like to see is something like being able to at least import. Sync is pretty technically tricky, but we could see how that works, but at least being able to import content from an existing Zotero library. And what we found over and over again, and what we know just because it's logical, is that there's a real overhead in getting set up in a new tool like this. So we don't want people to have to go through and create all of their content again if they already have it somewhere like Zotero. And that's a place too where like we'll want to talk more to really, you know, to folks who do use Zotero and make sure that we are connecting in the right ways to expand on what it doesn't achieve for them, but without trying to kind of, again, replicate effort. So hopefully that's an answer. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I see a couple of things in the chat. Okay, John wants to submit feature requests. Yes, please. Justin, does this import paywalled materials that could be proxied? That's unclear right now. This is where we're kind of in conversation with a few content aggregators. Again, the ones we talk to most are also nonprofit, who are kind of interested and aligned on the principles as much as possible. That has been something that we really tried to get further on understanding how this would work in libraries. We know that it first needs to work for an individual user. And so we took a little bit of a step back from figuring out the real details of that. So one thing we do know is that this is most useful when you can have, you know, your full collection in here. That's a big goal though. So we're kind of working through trying to cover, you know, one project's worth of materials and then, you know, most of your materials, that kind of thing. So is, as I say, a little, I don't have quite a clear answer to that, but it's something that I think might make sense in future. So hopefully that's good for you. Gerben, for user control and data protection, will you let users run the software themselves instead of hosting it for them? We are planning to be open source. There are kind of details to figure out around that. So yes, you know, I think for the vast majority of researchers we've spoken to, that would be too much work for them. They you know, aren't in the position to do that, but certainly I don't think there needs to be a limit on that. It's another way for people to be able to engage with it and, you know, share feedback and all of that. So Allegra, also as a trusted partner with ORCID, I may have missed this, but what kind of identifiers do you use, whereas Rebus indiates? Yeah, right now this is a personal tool, and so I don't necessarily see where the ORCID connection is. I might be missing something there, but because we aren't actually storing any or hosting any actual publications, sort of outputs that are then associated with an author, I'm not quite sure I see the connection, but if I'm missing something there, please ask a follow-up. Yeah, and then I'll just share what Balder said there. It is, so there are several components that are open source on GitHub. Some are specific, but it's open, so that, yeah. Okay. Give it another moment in case anyone else wants to chime in.
Hi, this is Kaveh. May I ask a question?
Please. Hi.
Yeah, so I'm Kaveh from River Valley Technologies. We work with publishers and we have platforms for scholarly publishers, end to end, from authoring all the way to the end. So it's quite interesting. It's very interesting presentation. Thank you. So interesting to allow people to annotate. We already used tools like Hypothesis, for example, as simple annotation. So I guess I can see that you have a lot of different ways of tagging, for example, with colors and other keywords. There was quite a lot of information. I missed something. I'm just wondering, is there any way of structuring the actual annotation? So if I put a piece of text in, is that free form text? What I was thinking as you were talking was, I'm really a fan of structured information. So maybe that text could be somehow structured in such a way that it can be text mined later. So for example, it might be you could make it so it's a sort of what they call a triple information. So that, any thought about that to make it you know, structured as opposed to free form text, or would that defeat the purpose?
No, I really like that idea. You know, I think we're starting from thinking first about human readers versus machine, and so that hasn't kind of been initially in our thinking. What we do have is it's rich text, so you can have, you know, images and formatting and styling and things like that. I think that's there's a bit of a, some people have asked when we show this, is this a text analysis tool? And it isn't. But we think there's a space for some light kind of tools like that, which is, it's kind of making me think of that a little bit. So I think that's a really interesting idea. I'd be interested in talking through more with folks how they would use that. And kind of how that's useful, where that then, you know, goes in terms of direction. But certainly, yeah, I think I'm gonna take a little note down. And if I missed the your organization, who you?
Yeah, it's called River Valley Technologies.
River Valley Technologies.
Yeah, I've just followed you, so if you follow me back, I'd love to be in touch.
Absolutely, I will do.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we have 4 minutes until the hour. Anybody else would like to share? You're very welcome to, or ask away. Thanks, Luann. And as anyone's gathering some last thoughts, I'll just drop in the links that I mentioned. And my computer is doing the thing where I can't find where I was. So here is the forum where you can get involved, and the form to become a beta tester is coming next. There we go. So if you fill that out, we'll reach out kind of within the next week or so with a few more details of when that's coming together. We'll just got a little bit of a polish to do next week, and then we'll get people in and playing with it. Okay, sounds like there are no other questions, so we might wrap up here. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's exciting to start talking about this project more publicly, and we'll have a whole lot more to come. Thanks, everyone.